I was typing prompts into these different windows and it felt like, holy shit, I'm living in the future. We're effectively becoming a system of record. So that's the user interface in GitHub today. We think that's not something that will work in this age of ages, where I often don't look at the code at all anymore.
Thank you for doing this, Thomas. I'd love for you to just tell the folks kind of about you and what you've done.
My favorite line for the past few years has been, I'm Thomas and I'm a developer. I used to be known as the CEO of GitHub from 2021 to 2025. So I'm not the founder of GitHub. Chris, Tom, and PJ were the founders, but I became the CEO after Nat Friedman decided to do other things. And I've been, doing software development since the early 90s. Started on a Commodore 64 and an East German Robotron computer. Have been passionate about software development throughout my career.
How did you get to be CEO of GitHub? What was that journey?
I had a startup in Germany called Hockey App. It was a mobile app development platform, so distributing your beta builds to testers, collecting crash reports, feedback, analytics, those kind of things. Mm-hmm. So late 2014, Microsoft acquired our company, and as part of that, I moved over to Seattle to start working in Microsoft's developer division. And in 2018, Nat Friedman, who at the time was one of the CVPs in the developer division, pitched to the board and Satya to acquire GitHub and pulled me into the deal as he needed the quote-unquote stern German to both execute the deal behind the scenes, but also decide what integration model GitHub should have within Microsoft. And as the deal closed in October, I joined GitHub together with Nat as VP Special Projects. And then, in 2021, Nat decided to do something else. Microsoft's leadership team promoted me into the CEO position.
You've been a software developer for a very long time. Yeah. Software development, I think, is going under one of the biggest shifts that it's ever gone through. Code used to be written primarily by humans. We're now at this moment where it's starting to be written predominantly by machines. Just sort of macro level, I would love your thesis of how software development and the software development lifecycle is going to change going forward.
If you actually zoom out, over the past 50 years, you realize we have always gone through these kind of transformations. We went from, these punch card to assembly language to the first proper programming languages like BASIC, and I learned first on Turbo Pascal on the PC, before that on BASIC and on the Commodore 64. And then actually the biggest shift, I'd say, of the 90s and early 2000s was open source. All of a sudden, you had access to all this free, publicly available software. You could see the source code, but more so, you had access to a worldwide community that you could chat with. Before, you had AOL or CompuServe or whatever at home, you had to figure it out all by yourself. So open source opened the internet, and open source opened up that world to software developers. Obviously, the cloud and mobile were similar shifts, and to a certain degree, gold rushes. And now with AI, we have the next big shift in this transformation. And all these shifts, move us up the abstraction ladder, right? Like COBOL and BASIC and assembly language, that was really low. You had to understand how much memory is and caches and what the PCI bus is and all these kind of things to make a performant app. And with AI now, we are at the highest level. We have reached, the highest level in the sense of our thoughts are all in human language.
And so how tangibly does that change the way developers work?
Project planning and project execution in software companies starts with an idea written, often in a Google Doc or in a tracking system like Jira or Linear or whatever have you. Mm-hmm. And then it is manually converted, from that big idea into smaller building blocks until you're ready to hand it off to a developer to write the code, right? That is actually the engineering process. Now you can actually, with AI, just go from idea to a prototype with a single written prompt. Depending on how specific you were with your original request and how much code already exists, it might even, suggest a programming language for you, frameworks, and those kind of things. And so I think that's the first shift is you have somebody to plan with that gives you all kinds of ideas. I think we underestimate the power of just that because it unlocks, the creativity itself. We get to the point when you want to implement that plan and you tell the agent, here, make it so. And then, it comes back to you and ask questions as it gets stuck. That I think feels very magical. You're using natural language and it builds you more or less all the code.
Yep.
And so all these things that have taken so much time, it got me out of my flow, got me out of my stream of thoughts on the big idea that I'm having. I can now hand off to the agent. Especially, on Saturday I was working on some hobby projects and I was watching a movie and every time
I was coding in the background.
And I was coding. Well, I had the movie on my laptop screen and on the big screen I had my terminal windows.
Yeah.
And it was a sci-fi movie, Oblivion with Tom Cruise. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was typing prompts into these different windows and it felt like, holy shit, I'm living in the future.
So let's double click into the storage layer, which is where Git sits. Yeah. So Git was, I think, launched in like 2005, and it's sort of been the standard for version control and code storage. I think part of your thesis is that in the age of agent-generated code, Git is insufficient for the developer workflow. And so I'd love if you could kind of give a sense of like, what does Git do? Why is it insufficient? And what else needs to be captured in order to unlock real value?
It is not insufficient as a technology because Git is ultimately, it doesn't matter to it whether you're storing code files or text files in it.
Right.
You're right. 2005 it had 20 years anniversary last year. I think in the grand general scheme, Git is the version control system that will be around, making a bold prediction here in 20 years and more. Now, Git, by design, stores your code files or any text files in your repository. And the other storage mechanism, obviously, is the commit message, right? Like whenever you commit, you can type something and more agents actually type that commit message. Mm-hmm. What's missing, though, and what was always missed, and what you could never get in a world before agent was the thought process of the developer, right? Like, where did I start my day? What decisions did I make? Where did I course correct because I saw unit tests are failing and like, oh, this isn't actually good. And that happens as much with agents as it happened with humans. So that session log is becoming a more and more important artifact. And our hypothesis is that we should store that always together with the code so you have both of them together. And the immediate benefit of that is obviously that all my coworkers can also read these thought process. So can the code review agent. Mm-hmm. They can read through that transcript and you can run another agent on top of this transcript to say what are the decisions that Thomas made. So you don't have to read through, through every tool call and every reasoning step of the model. Mm-hmm. Imagine you would join like a company like Shopify today that's over 10 years old, has over 4,000 engineers, I think. Imagine how much code they're producing every single day, every single week, right? Like that's tens of thousands of pull requests. If you do the math, like 4,000, 5 days a week, how many pull requests are there every day? Over the lifespan of 10 plus years, if they would have logged all the sessions, the institutional knowledge that ultimately tracks over time and that is accessible to me as somebody who can kind of like read that, like the Shopify Bible in that example, or, the agent that can figure out, was that an intentional design decision or is that an actual, a test failure where the test is broken? That I think is going to be incredibly valuable.
So there's this meaning layer that sits on top of the actual code that Entire is now capturing. So can you talk to me about how you capture that, what that sort of primitive looks like?
The first product that we launched earlier this year is the Entire CLI. Mm-hmm. You can easily install it with one command, and it lets you pick the agent you're using. We're supporting like more or less all the major agents, and that's it. It sets a hook for that agent, but that's transparent to you. Mm-hmm. And now you can use your agent as you did before, and every time in the agent you type commit/push, or you still do that manually on a second terminal and say git commit and git push.
Yep.
It not only pushes your source code, it also pushes your session log captured from the agent into the same repository. And before we do that, we run a post-processing step on it to remove secrets and other personal information. Yep. And so really simple, you install it once, it captures all your session, it stores them in the same Git repository as your code is. And then we have certain features on top of it. For example, writing what we call a dispatch, like a summary of all the changes in that repository, or you can code review, entire review all the changes in your branch with the same or with a different agent to kind of like review your own work before you submit the pull request.
What is that unlocking that otherwise was not possible?
The biggest unlock here is that it just works in the background. Of course, you can, go into your .codex folder and find, the JSON file or extract it from the SQLite database that some agents are using. But it's just seamless for the developer. You don't have to do any manual steps. Every time you push, it just pushes all your session logs. So I think that's the primary unlock. And then obviously you can do a lot of things with these session logs. I already mentioned, dispatch and review. A very simple scenario is, lots of developers now have, a second or third Mac at home. And so what you can do with Entire, because it tracks your session in the repo, you can actually resume a session on a different machine. It really is about improving, the convenience for the developer when working with these agents. And, because it's in the Git repository, of course, it stores all the session of all your team members, right? And so you have a shared knowledge, not only the code base, but all the intent, all the semantic information stored in the repository across all team members.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I love is that you guys build in public, and the velocity is pretty impressive. So you've sort of established checkpoints, which is like this kind of data primitive. Yeah. You've made it user-friendly. You've added collaboration. There's now this web app that allows for a lot of clarity and a good UI to help explore sort of what's happening around the code base. I'd love if you could talk about the product roadmap.
We have a stated vision on our homepage, and we're working in 3 layers. We already talked about checkpoints and sessions. That's what we call the semantic layer. That's the middle layer in our stack. Yeah. On top of that is the user interface. You mentioned our web viewer. We actually treat the CLI and the web viewer as equal surface areas. Yeah. And we have one of our first principles: everything has to be CLI first, as that's where developers are actually spending their day. If we think about GitHub from a user base perspective, the primary primitive is the repository, and the repository is effectively a file browser. Right? It shows your folders, it shows your files, shows the content of those files. So that's the user interface in GitHub today. We think that's not something that will work in this age of agents, where I often don't look at the code at all anymore. Right? And so we think the pull request and the repository have to change in the user interface layer. And then at the bottom is the question about, how to store all this. And as we already talked about, Git is our answer. But we believe you have to transform Git into what it actually was intended to be, which is a network of more than one host. Not storing it all in a centralized place, but having it in as many places as possible to have not only high availability, but also let agents query these repositories at very high rate limits.
How do you think about Entire's sort of surface area relative to a few different players? So you have GitHub, you have the coding agents like Cursor, Claude Code. Yeah. One of the things I've seen is a lot of these AI native products have a lot of blurriness around like, where's the edge? How do you think about that for Entire? Like, what is your domain that no one else can touch or won't touch as well as you're working with it?
I think that's fundamentally a perspective of investors, that they love to see companies that nobody else can touch. But everything in software can be cloned, and in fact, can be cloned now much faster than agents. Right. I'd like to think about business like sports leagues. Formula One, I think, is one of the most competitive sports out there. And there's a new world champion every year, and maybe multiple years in a row it's the same one, like Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen. But there's always the chance that some other team can both win a race or can win the season, as we saw last year when Lando Norris with McLaren won the world championship, and also both the drivers and the constructors. Right. And so, we should realize that in this world where now agents write more code, the competitive advantage is not that you have a space carved out for you. Right. That nobody. In fact, I would be suspicious if no competitor would be trying the same thing, because it means you're probably on the wrong path. But it's also things like our brand. Yeah. In the GitHub brand, is famously super loved by software developers. I mean, those kind of things, right? Like, you want to establish a brand like that in the developer space. And I think that is equally important as building a great product. But both of these things need to be true. Like, you can't have a great brand and a shitty product, because developers will figure that out really fast. But also, if you can have the greatest product in the world and you suck at marketing and branding, and you won't win. And look, at the end of the day, any company is defined by the team. And again, this brings us back, to Formula One, right? The best team is the people, both the drivers, the commando stand, the race engineers, and the all the people in simulation and developing the car. And you can't become the driver's champion without having a great team that builds you a great car and, has the right strategy. So the same is true for companies and for startups. They have to build a great team, one that is highly competitive, one that wants to win. Product, brand marketing, team, those I think are the crucial ingredients for us, to compete in the market, regardless of whether any of our competitors is building the same thing as us, or vice versa, right? Like you could also ask the question, what's stopping us, from building another IDE or another coding agent?
Right. You were the CEO of GitHub, though. Mm-hmm. They have massive distribution. Mm-hmm. They have a clear head start in terms of developer love, developer mindshare. So what's your strategy to become the source of truth for the agentic record, to beat someone like GitHub to it and to get the product to that level?
In the short term, I don't have to get to that level. The goals are very different than the goals that we have. And that obviously is true for many incumbents and disruptors in their space. GitHub is a great platform and is a great team, and they're highly focused on their goals. I think rumors recently had it that they passed $3 billion in annual revenue run rate. Mm-hmm. Let's say they need to grow by 40%. That means they have to find 1.2 billion in additional revenue next year. I don't have to find $1 billion in revenue next year, right? Like on a very different stage in my company's life cycle. And the game the disruptor is playing is finding a very small slice, of the market and trying to disrupt it. And today, we already talked about it. We are in the space of tracking all these sessions and doing cool stuff with the data we are collecting there, right? Like we're effectively becoming a system of record for agentic world, right? And that means we're recording, and then we will have agents reason over those recordings. And then, we'll see how we reconcile that, to use RRR, reconcile that, to improve the developer workflow.
So actually a good question on that. So I think one of the theories behind Entire is that as agents get better, this semantic layer, this layer of meaning becomes more valuable. Why do you think that's true? Like when we have GPT-8, why does this semantic layer still have value versus the models and the agents just being able to just stare just at the code base and reason over that, and that's enough?
Because the code base doesn't codify all the decisions that you're making as a developer, right? Like take a very basic example. Your code is written in Go. How would the agent know why you pick Go as a programming language and not Rust or Python or any of the other modern programming languages, right? Like, why did you structure the code base that way? There's hundreds, if not thousands or hundreds of thousands of decisions that are flowing into a software project that not only decide about scale and functionality, of course, performance, security, compliance, those kind of things. They also decide about what business are you in. Those are all decisions that can be very different between two projects that otherwise do the same thing.
So what's an example of that? Like, what does that institutional knowledge unlock that smarter or better agents can't deliver?
I think Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA, recently talked on a podcast about how their forward deployed engineers are helping those AI research lab to optimize, their stack for each model individually, and can find performance optimization in factor 2 or 3 just by NVIDIA engineers effectively looking at the CUDA stack, the kernel, if you will, of the model, and optimizing that for that specific model, right? And again, like if an agent would be able to just do that, of course, you wouldn't send out all these forward deployed engineers around the world, but it can, because it doesn't have all the decisions, the decision log, if you will, and also the learnings from the engineers in it. Now, does that mean that models can get better analyzing this code? Of course they will.
Right.
But the humans instructing the models are also getting better. We gotta become proficient with these tools, and I think the most successful engineers, like Peter Steinberger of OpenClaw fame, comes to mind. Read his blog. He has been tinkering with these agents for like a year.
Yeah.
And it's not like OpenClaw fell, like the apple on his head. As he got more proficient with these agents, he realized what the needs are that he has and what the technology can solve for him. And I think that's where we are in this journey. And that's why I think, bringing those learnings, the institutional knowledge of the project on the company, the context layer, if you will, into the repository is incredibly important.
That's actually really interesting. It's like by creating this context layer, you're actually changing the way that developer works, and then that has this kind of circular feedback loop. So suddenly they have this rich data set around intent that they can query and build from, and then that becomes this fundamentally new starting point for their work, and that incentivizes more and more engagement over time. That's really interesting.
But in Slack, our company was founded in September. I think we set up the Slack in August. Every discussion that we had since then is codified in that. And of course, that's one context layer. For many startups, Google Docs is another such context layer. Bringing these all together will be incredibly important. And I think in-person companies will have to ask themselves the question, how do I record all my meetings and hallway conversations and whatever have you? Because otherwise I'm losing like 20-30% of my company's knowledge in these what is in a way the upside of in-person work, being able to brainstorm on a whiteboard is now becoming a disadvantage compared to remote first companies who have their whiteboards online as well and all the discussions around it.
There has to be an ingestion mechanism for all of this context that we're now generating.
Except, it becomes socially awkward. Last time we met in a coffee shop, I don't know if you would have appreciated if I had recorded the whole conversation.
Yeah.
You're not saying certain things when you're always on the record.
Are you hiding certain things right now? I'm kidding. I want to talk about distribution in the age of AI. It's getting very noisy. There's so many products out there. What are some of your learnings, especially from GitHub, about how you both reach developers, but then also how you maintain love and not just become another tool that gets picked up and then disposed of when the next thing comes along?
Most developers have a really low threshold for what they're tolerating in their workflow, right? And so you have to ship something to them. You have a very short amount of time to delight them, to show them that there's value in this. Otherwise, it's uninstall. And then, once you have, fucked that up, then the challenge you have is when do you have another chance with that same developer? It's certainly not 3 minutes later.
Yeah.
Right. So that's number one. I think the first experience with a product, installing, in our case, the CLI, working with your agent, and seeing the first commit going through. If that's not a great experience, a delightful experience, you're immediately reducing your chances of long-term wins. In that same, realm is also, I fundamentally believe developer tools are only successful if they go developer first, not decision maker first, not CTO first.
Yep.
And now what is great, in the last year or so, that you actually see more and more C-suite CEOs, CTOs, CIOs, CISOs even, realizing that these agents gets them back into coding. And so you actually now can be a developer and an executive at a big company again.
Yep.
And I think that, that transformation, but it is developer first, right? Because you're just letting those people come back to be what they originally learned in the minimum amount of time that they actually have available for coding tasks, right? So developers first. I don't think as a developer tool you have a chance to get high distribution by going enterprise first. And often, these design partners, they have all good intentions, but they're actually pushing you in the wrong direction because they're serving the need of the large organization, not the need of the best developers in your organization. And the really cool thing about a software development company that builds tools for developers is we are our first customer. Or like the other principle that we have, like I already mentioned, we're CLI first. The next one is we're building entire on entire, right? I think that is, equally crucial. Like if we are not using our own tools, our own processes, our own, implementation of the ideas we're having, we shouldn't go out and try to sell that or launch it to other developers. And I think that is what ultimately becomes a competitive advantage over much larger organizations that, again, have to serve the needs of really large deals.
So you hit on something that I wanted to touch on, which is the changing face of the developer. So as coding becomes much more accessible to non-technical or product managers or designers that are actually going to be interfacing with the code or coding agents, how do you think about reaching them, this new class of builder?
We have three hypotheses around this. We believe the roles in a company are collapsing to a certain degree, aka you will have a Venn diagram where what a PM is doing, a designer is doing, a marketer is doing, and an engineer is doing, all meets in the center at code. the designer is transforming into a design engineer.
Yeah.
And the product manager, should move away from just writing specs and create mockups in PowerPoint to create a prototype. And some are talking about this already, that you build a prototype for every feature that you have in mind, and your code artifact together with the intent, the session log, becomes the artifact that you're handing over to the engineer, right? So instead of filing a ticket in Jira, you're basically as a product manager are opening a draft pull request that has your session log that we are capturing with entire in it, and a draft code. And maybe the engineer looks at this and this is terrible code, but as they also have the session log, they can then tell the agent, well, refactor this branch to align with how we would do that, and leverage the session log, the checkpoints, all that semantic information to do that in such a way that what the product manager intended is still being implemented. And that goes to the second hypothesis, which is the context is collapsing. You need all that information in a single cloud, in a single space. Whatever the agent needs to make the decision and implement the feature needs to be accessible in a context layer. And so the context is collapsing, and you want to have it all in one place. And then the workflow is also collapsing. And I think that's like, are we filing still a ticket in linear? And then basically somebody else has to pick it up? Or why don't you just feed it into the agent and basically shorten the planning and tracking workflow by just feeding it into the agent, and now we have a different artifact that you're handing over to the team. And so we think the workflow will ultimately collapse in much fewer steps, that allows a single builder in a small and large company to bring a feature all the way from idea through conception, design, prototyping, implementation, testing into production.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming in and spending the time. I am a big fan of the product, and I hope this gets out to lots of developers out there.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. If you want to learn more about what Thomas and the team are building over at Entire, head to entire.io. And if you enjoyed this conversation and want more founder interviews and my notes on startups and technology in your inbox, subscribe at thetimes.blog.